So my name is Hakeem Hicks, and I am a master's level graduate student at the illustrious Clark Atlanta University, where I am studying school counseling. I am also a behavioral health ambassador for the HBCU C.A.R.E.S program, which is an initiative on the campus of Clark Atlanta University. Today, I have the privilege of interviewing Dr. Asha Dickerson, who has done so much within the field of counseling. Dr. Dickerson is not only a professor, but she also works in private practice, is the president-elect for the American Counseling Association of Georgia, and offers supervision services and mentorship to counselors in training. Good morning. So question number one, what made you want to become a counselor?
Well, I started my career working in child protective services in Alabama. And I worked specifically with, I say children, but some were adults, ages 14 to 21 who were aging out of the system. And no matter where I placed them, I mean, I could really put them in mansions, with millionaire families. They always wanted to go back to their family of origin. At the time, I think roughly more than 80% of cases with child protective services were due to substance use and abuse, whether that be because the parents were missing, because the children were neglected or abused. There was a connection there. And since the children always wanted to go back to their mom, I mean, no matter what kind of issues mom had, they wanted to be there. I thought I'd do better by working with the root of the problem, which was the parents.
Gotcha. So I definitely understand my story is kind of similar to why I wanted to be a counselor also. It's kind of the emotional traumas that I've had from my childhood that stem from family things. It made me want to plug in even more because it's kind of a connection that you can't fully sever because it's the person that gave you life and it's the person that you always assume would be like the points of refuge and sanctuary and love and affection and all of that. So I definitely can understand that.
Yeah, I mean, not just that, even if they're not that person, you still want the best for, if you already know that your family member, your family of origin, they can't take care of you, even while you're gaining success, you want them to get better.
Absolutely, 100%. So on your journey to becoming a counselor, what type of education or training did you have to acquire?
Well, I got my master's degree at University of Alabama, Birmingham. And after getting my master's, of course, there's supervision when it comes to counseling. And supervision is basically another 3 years post-master's where most times you're paying someone else to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, that basically you're not ruining any lives. So you're working your cases, but you're coming back and you're talking to them. And it's different than your administrative supervisor because your administrative supervisor is making sure your paperwork is in, that you're not cussing people out at work and stuff. But your clinical supervisor is making sure that you're actually providing quality services and that you're taking care of yourself. After that, I did go back and get my PhD at Auburn University, and that was in counselor education and supervision, so that I could be the person to provide supervision and teach other counselors, up and coming counselors.
Gotcha. So do you prefer the teaching aspect of your counseling or do you prefer actually practicing?
I prefer the teaching aspect, and I really think that's because I've been in the field for a while. And I know that counselors, I mean, we hear this all the time, they get burnt out, they have to practice self-care. And so although I like seeing clients, I don't want to do that all day, every day. At the same time, I want to still feel like I'm connected to the community and like I know what's going on. I mean, my students teach me so much. They teach me the new drug lingo. They tell me about new treatment modalities that I may want to be interested in getting training in. So I enjoy the teaching a lot more.
Gotcha. Okay. So I know you mentioned that you've been in the field for a while. What was your first job after completing graduate school, and was it everything you thought it would be?
Well, that's an interesting question because I had a paid internship while I was in my master's program, and it was at a methadone clinic that I won't name, but I understood how methadone was supposed to work. It's drug replacement therapy, and we're looking at harm reduction versus complete abstinence. And I felt like I was doing a really good job. Clients start getting better. We start coming down on the dosage. And I was told by my supervisor at the time that if I keep getting people off the methadone, how do I expect for them to pay my salary? So I was very pregnant at the time. And while I went on maternity leave, I was let go. So me and all my ethics wanted to get people off of methadone. So I lost my first counseling job after 6 months.
For doing the right thing.
Right, right. But that's okay because I picked up my next counseling job at a place called Fellowship House, Birmingham. And I do some consulting and training work for Fellowship House. And I mean, they luckily were kind of familiar with the place where I worked. And they allowed me to build their family program because I still wanted to work in addictions and because I was interested in the family aspect of that. They allowed me to build the family program and be a family counselor in an addictions treatment center, which is my dream. And I was there until I went into academia.
Okay, wow. So I know that you mentioned being passionate about addictions. Are you passionate about any other sector or role within the field of counseling?
Yes, co-parent counseling, because we know that about 50% of, marriages don't work out. And then there are those who, were never married in the first place. But it's important for me for people to understand that just because you're not going to be together doesn't mean you have to cuss each other out every day. And that, we want to keep the children from being involved in that. And so I work a lot with blended families. So it goes with, when you're separate, when you get back with your next person, what's that going to look like? What's everyone's roles going to be? Let's work through any resentments we have. So I'm passionate about that and also about multicultural counseling. And that for me goes just beyond, I think when people think multicultural, they just think race. But for me, it goes well beyond race. We want to, include every piece of a person in their culture.
Absolutely. So that kind of segues into my very next question. As someone who is passionate about helping my own communities, do you believe that there should be graduate or certification programs that offer specializations in counseling minority populations with known special needs, such as LGBTQ community, excuse me, the Latinx community, or the Black communities?
So that's another interesting question. These are great. Well, let me say that I think that multicultural competence is so important that although it'd be great to have certification in it, I feel like if that's the case, everybody needs to get certification in it. So I wouldn't say there needs to be separate certification programs, although I do see how those would be helpful, but I think that it needs to be a requirement for licensure, just like in Georgia specifically, you have to have 5 hours of ethics training every year. I think you need to have 5 hours of multicultural training as well, especially since we're in a continually changing society. And what's okay this year might not be okay next year. Same with ethics. So you need to continue to do an updating of your training every year.
Okay. So my next question, the Lambda legal study of LGBT issues reported that 41% of graduate program directors felt that their programs trained their master's level students slightly well or not well at all when it came to being prepared to deal with LGBTQ plus clients. How do you believe the profession should be handling um, behavioral health professionals developing competencies in aiding that minorities? But you pretty much just explained that. Um, do you think there's another way outside of like mandating like there be an annual 5 hours that you have to meet to keep your certification or your licensure?
I think that when it comes to that, it's something that needs to, so let me say, in a lot of schools we have is either called multicultural counseling or social and cultural diversity, things of that nature. That needs to be, to me, like the second or third class that you take in school. So that, and then there has to be a continued assessment throughout the program because, some people get through the class and they get an A, but for us, and I'm saying myself and my colleagues as counselor educators, it's up to us to be gatekeepers. And you should not be able to get through a counseling program just because you make A's. We should be cluing into what is this person saying? Are they continuously offensive? And do we need to do a dispositional assessment? and get them additional training. Some people will need additional training just because they don't have the background that other students do. So I think that's a great place to start. But when it comes to behavioral health, I think it's also important to bring that into other programs outside of counseling. When you think of like behavioral health centers, people come in contact with their case manager a lot more than they come in contact with their counselor. And so our case managers are getting bachelors in psychology, they're getting them in sociology, social work. Sometimes they're getting bachelor's degrees in history, and this is just the job that they can get. But I think it'd be important for undergraduate programs to have an undergraduate cultural competence course. So we can start, at least at the base level. We can't really expect them to come in having the same knowledge that we do, because that's a requirement for the master's level program, not for the undergraduate program.
Gotcha. I've never thought about actually incorporating into the undergraduate studies. And I think that's a good idea. The same way I feel like undergraduates have certain core requirements that they have to meet. I think with us living in a society that is extremely diverse, and as you said earlier, it's constantly evolving. I feel like no matter what your profession is, everybody should have some type of basic understanding and knowledge about multiculturalism.
Exactly. If you're planning on going to law school, especially if you're planning on going to like medical school, you need to have base level cultural competence, and then have some additional classes that are available for the students to take if they want to dive into that further. I know when I was in school, that was not a class. I think, well, let me start by saying I went to a PWI, so the most we had was African American history. And there wasn't even an African American history major, I don't think, but that's like
that's actually what I got my bachelor's in.
Like that's the closest you could get to learn about somebody else. And I just think it would have been a great idea, although I intentionally put myself in situations through other organizations that I worked with, and volunteering to learn more about different groups of people. I know for a fact that 90% of the students at UAB just didn't do that. And then they went right on, to medical school or whatever other school they went to, and they're still out there saying offensive things to people in hospitals.
So for those people who are watching this and understanding that, hey, I need to kind of sharpen my skills on some of that multiculturalism, or this may be their beginning start point, what are some books or documentaries or resources that you would recommend that they check out?
Well, I have some behind me here. The New Jim Crow is a good one. I have Stamped, and I actually have my teenager and her friends reading that with me, even though I've read it. We're rereading it together. Those are two good ones to start, like base level. I like White Fragility. It's good for, our Caucasian counterparts, but I think it's a good read for people of color as well. Those are my top three right now, but also there are the textbooks. When it comes to the multicultural textbooks, they're not hard reads. So there are a lot of older editions, and they just changed the editions up just a little bit so they could keep making money. But you can pull an old edition and start teaching yourself a little bit here and there. It's not like our group counseling and our theories textbooks. Those could be hard reads for other people. But for anyone else who's interested, pick up an old multicultural textbook.
That's a good idea. So as a counselor, you are expected to push for advocacy and social justice. What does that look like within your personal practice or efforts?
Well, a lot of times it looks like going to court with clients. I work a lot with teenagers and young adults, and so I found myself recently visiting schools a lot. Not just, it used to be, showing up for IEPs and 504 meetings, but just in the last year, I've found myself going with parents to talk to administrators about how, what a teacher or a substitute did, was racist and was institutional racism, and, how a child has been targeted, and also offering at that point to train their teachers and administrators and counseling staff on cultural competence and even trauma-informed care or anything like that. Some of the schools have jumped on and asked me to come. Others at a minimum, let whatever charge against the student go, because they don't want me to take it any further than it needs to go. But now when it comes to my clients, they're like my babies, and we will just keep on going. And a lot of like, we don't want the smoke, so we will let this go, knowing that the child, is working with this clinician. On a larger level, I am the chair of the American Counseling Association of Georgia. And so we have a lot of advocacy efforts that we do with ACA. We have some things in the pipeline to look at what's going on with politics, especially in Georgia, because we're in the limelight right now. So we want to know what these politicians think about mental health, what they think about cultural competence, what they think about Georgia versus the world. And we know, if you pay attention to the news, two of them have a very different viewpoint from the other two. So I'm very interested in knowing what their thoughts are on that.
Gotcha. So you have already accomplished so much in your career thus far. What is next for you? What big things do you have your sights set on?
Retirement? I don't know, but but I am still involved with the Association for Multicultural Counseling and Development, which is a division of ACA, and I served as their Southern Regional Rep for about 5 years. No, it was not about, it was 5 years. So although I stepped back from that role right now while I'm serving as chair of ACA of Georgia, I want to get back and a little more involved with them in the future. I'm also on the MBCC Foundation Council, and I'm hoping to, I just now started that role. I've worked with them in the past. I'd like to get more involved with them. And, hopefully in my grand scheme of things, I like to slowly teach fewer classes and instead, teach and train people who are going out into the classes. Let's say that.
Okay.
I
And
want to talk to people when I want to talk to them and not.
and my very last question, what advice would you offer to graduate students who are approaching graduation and are terrified of going into the field?
Understand that you have to do your time. I can understand being terrified, especially when you start out. Most people have the little agency jobs. They're not getting paid as much as they want to get paid. They're going to have the toughest cases they have usually in the beginning, but understand that that is just to train you to get to where you want to be. And a lot of that stuff is temporary. Now, let me say, if you're not really ambitious, it won't be temporary for you. You'll just be doing that for a long time. But if you remain ambitious and continue to get training beyond what the school has given you, you'll, succeed far more than you ever thought you would. Don't believe the hype that counselors only talk to people, only do individual counseling, only do group counseling, don't make a lot of money. There's so much more you can do, but you have to be willing to put in the work to get there.
Awesome. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for just taking your time out of your busy day, I'm sure, to just talk with us for a little bit and impart a little bit of wisdom to a lot of HBCU students that are even considering possibly going into behavioral health, because we know that that's something that we as a community, especially, we definitely need. There are a lot of things that we need to unpack and start to process and begin the journey of even getting closer to healing.